certification program. Linguistically responsive and asset-based teaching. And we also have advocacy and policy, which gives students the conceptual tools and knowledge to transform both the policies and structures of education in order to support vibrant anti-racist classroom practices. So if any of you who are not currently students in the program, that sounds amazing to you, you should know that our priority scholarship application deadline for our summer 2021 cohort is December 15th. And for more information about our program, you can visit our website and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. And I believe Ann Musica, our lovely program coordinator, is going to put that information in the chat for you. So in the wake of inequities exacerbated by COVID-19 and the continuation of state-sanctioned violence against Black and Brown people, the task of caring for, educating, and uplifting our most marginalized students remains critical, urgent task for educators, advocates, policymakers, and community leaders. And so the 5 educators and advocates that we'll be learning from tonight have dedicated their careers to this task. And so I'm so honored to have them join us tonight for a conversation about ensuring ensuring equity and justice in COVID-19 Washington, DC. And I'll clap for them since you all cannot quite clap for them. I'm going to introduce them one at a time. And if you wouldn't mind just waving to our audience when I get to you, so they can put some faces to your bios, that would be much appreciated. Just to start, our moderator, Dr. Sabrina Wesley-Nero, is the director of the program in Education, Inquiry, and Justice, and the assistant director of the program in Educational Transformation, both here at Georgetown. Her work in these programs emphasizes community-based pedagogy and an equity-focused interdisciplinary approach to the study of education and teacher preparation. She specializes in the experiences of students who historically have been marginalized as a result of their racial, socioeconomic, cultural, and linguistic identities, the teachers who serve them, and the educational context in which these students thrive. Sabrina began her career in education as a Spanish bilingual, Spanish immersion, and ESL public school teacher. And now for our wonderful panelists. So to start, Monique Cole-Gary is a longtime education advocate. She currently serves as a parent leader with DC Parents Amplifying Voices in Education, otherwise known as PAVE. She previously served several years on the Northern Virginia Delta Education and Community Service Foundation. She holds a BS in biology from Norfolk State University, an MS in biotechnology from the Johns Hopkins University, and a JD from American University. She lives in Washington, DC with her husband, kindergartner, daughter, and feisty small dog. Welcome, Monique. Thank you. LaShunda Hill is a lifelong child advocate committed to positively transforming the systems that impact the lives of children and youth, navigating risks so that those systems are restorative and healing instead of retributive and harmful. As the first executive director of the Office for Students in the Care of District of Columbia, SCDC, Ms. Hill leads work to strengthen the educational and workforce services and supports for students who come into contact with the child welfare and justice systems in the District of Columbia. Ms. Hill holds a BA in International Studies, a BS in Public Policy, and a BS in Sociology from the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, an EDM from Harvard University, and is currently completing her JD at Georgetown. In 2018, Ms. Hill received the Beth Arnavtis Gutsy Advocate for Youth Award from the National Juvenile Justice Network, which is given annually to an individual who advocates for youth and racial justice and exemplifies tenacity, vision, fearlessness, and wisdom. Welcome, LaShunda. Maura Marino is co-founder and chief executive officer of Education Forward DC. Prior to launching Education Forward DC in July 2016, Maura served as the managing partner at New Schools Venture Fund and lead teacher at East Palo Alto High School. She earned a BA with honors in American Studies from Stanford University, an MA in Teaching Secondary Social Studies from Columbia University, and an MBA from Harvard University. Welcome, Maura. And last but certainly not least, Patricia Stamper was born in Northern California and raised in Compton, California. She moved to Tacoma Park, Maryland in 2004. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in General Studies with concentrations in History and Psychology from Washington Adventist University, formerly Columbia Union College, and a Master of Public Administration from Strayer University. She is married to her childhood friend, biggest cheerleader, and most constructive critic, Pete Stamper, and they have 2 children together. Patricia has been supporting and teaching children with cognitive and physical disabilities for the last 10 years. Since March of 2016, she has worked at Minor Elementary School here in DC. Patricia is currently on the November 3rd, 2020 general election ballot here in the District of Columbia for the ANC 7C04 seat to represent the Deanwood neighborhood. Welcome, Patricia. So just a couple quick logistics before I let our panel take over. So we'll allow about like an hour and 15 minutes or so for panel discussion, and then open it up to you all for questions from the audience. So you're welcome to at any point during the panel or during the Q&A, I would ask you to chat your questions to Ann Musica, who is our lovely program coordinator, and she will make sure they get to the panel. If you also have any technical issues or difficulties or questions that arise, please also chat Ann. And finally, we would welcome you if you'd like to tweet about our panel tonight using the hashtag EDTR Speaker Series. And I think that's all from me. I'm going to stop talking and let our lovely panel take over. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Professor Sinclair. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us. A special thanks to everyone on the panel. I'm very excited to get started with this evening conversation and our discussion with our panelists and with our audience. So we're going to jump right in. To begin with, we're just going to ask each panelist to go around and tell us a little bit about themselves, the work they do, and or the organization they work with, and really the work they've done so far to ensure equity and justice in DC, particularly during this COVID era. And to start on this question, we'll start with Monique.
Hi, everyone. My name is Monique. You mentioned in the bio, I live in DC with my husband and daughter. I am a parent leader with PAVE, so I'm not someone who works professionally in education, but I do work alongside with PAVE as a representative of Ward 6. And in that capacity, we have parent priorities that we work on and we put forward with the city to try to ensure that we inform and that we inspire and connect parents with the things that they need to help their students be successful and to ensure equity throughout the city for all of our students.
All right, thank you. Next, just tell us again a little bit about yourself and the work you do to work toward equity for DC's youth. We'll go to LaShunda next.
Hi, everyone. So, yes, thank you. I'm LaShunda Hill. I'm currently serving as Executive Director of the Office for the Students in the Care of DC within the Deputy Mayor for Education's office here in the district. And we are a newly created office within the DME. This year I joined in January, and I tell people that we have the distinct privilege and honor to focus specifically on the students who are system involved in DC's care. So that includes students who have come into contact with the child welfare system, as well as those students who have come into contact with the justice system. And our commitment, our challenge, our mission, our focus is to ensure that those students are receiving the highest quality educational and workforce development programs and services and supports here in the district that build on their strengths, that address their needs, and that open up windows of opportunity. And so that's the work that I do now with the SCDC. And it really is an outgrowth for me personally of the work that I've been doing my entire life. I really come to this space, the education space, really thinking about how can you bring together all the different child serving systems, right? Education, workforce development, mental health, social services, to best serve those students who we know need us the most, right? Who need those services and supports the most, who need us to show up for them when they encounter challenges, when they encounter risk the most. And so that's really the core of the work and really the charge of the SCDC. And you asked, some examples of how we've been doing that as a result of COVID-19. One of the things that the Deputy Mayor for Education's office and the SCDC formed really early on in the pandemic were, several working groups that sought to really, take governmental agencies that sometimes can operate in silos, we all know that, and bring them together and say, like, this is a moment where collaboration and communication is key. And, sometimes we think, oh, another working group. But what I've seen over the past few months since the pandemic began is really across agencies, across stakeholders, including community-based partners, people really coming together and putting their heads down and saying, we're in a lot of ways, we're learning as we go. We're building the ship as we're sailing, but we've created this collective commitment to trying to actively problem solve and tenaciously problem solve together across agencies and stakeholders. So I look forward to talking a little bit more about that, but that's who I am and what I do.
Thank you, LaShunda. Maura, can we go next to you? Just a brief introduction of who you are and the work that you do, your organization, the work that it does, and particularly anything that you've done so far to ensure equity and justice for DC students.
Thanks. Thanks so much for the invitation to be here tonight. It's really nice to be with all of you talking about this really important topic. I'm the CEO of Education Forward DC, and our mission is about ensuring that every student in DC has equitable access to a great education. And we specifically think about the students who start furthest from opportunity and what we can do to support the activists, the leaders, the organizations that then can lift up and support those students in working to achieve their dreams and carry out their most ambitious plans. And so as part of that work, we have given away about $40 million over the last 4 years to support improvements in quality and equity in public schools in DC. But with the COVID crisis, we really wanted to make sure we pivoted to meet the moment because the needs of our students changed really overnight. So we launched a project called the DC Education Equity Fund in collaboration with the Greater Washington Community Foundation and with the DC Public Education Fund, which is essentially the fundraising arm of DC Public Schools. And together we were able to mobilize resources to support basic needs for students, and then really to support technology access, so devices and internet at home or hotspots to make sure that students were able to continue their learning. And now as we've gotten deeper into the crisis, we're continuing to try to understand the need from folks who are on the ground and be responsive in supporting what students and families need right now to be successful in learning in this crisis.
Thank you, Maura. And really I want to latch on to one of the phrases you mentioned. You said meet the moment. And meeting the moment is really what educators and families are doing every day. So for our last kind of just introductory round, I want to welcome Patricia. Patricia, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you've been doing really to meet the moment, the work that you do, particularly around equity and justice for DC students.
I apologize about that, my son. Good evening, my name is Patricia Stamper. I am an educator at Minor Elementary on Board 6. I'm also an Empower Ed Fellow. The biggest thing for me personally, when COVID hit, I felt it was a lot. But what I'm doing now, I just felt I need to meet the basic needs. What I saw was chaos looking outside my window. The children on the 4900 block of Just Street here in Northeast, they were attempting to knock over an ice cream truck. It was about, I counted 26 kids. They were upset because the ice cream truck person was charging more than normal. So I went out there, I started blowing my whistle. I officiate lacrosse, girls lacrosse, field hockey, and basketball just because I like athletics and I like to get paid to work out. So I went out there, I was like, whoa, we don't want to get arrested. There's COVID in jails. What's up? Like, what can I do to meet the need? Like, what do y'all want? They're like, they don't have hot sausages. He's trying to charge $2 for hot sausage. I'm like, okay, well, what else do you want? They were like, they just start throwing out, I like this, I like that, I like Takis, I like apples, I need water. Okay, cool. I'll go buy it. I went to BJ's. I found who sells hot sausages in DC wholesale. I found all these resources and I started just giving it to the kids. I'm like, hey, if you do your packet, if you come back with your packet, that's great. Here's a hot sausage. Hey, let's check in. So now the kids, I've built a rapport in my community because I felt like from what I was seeing, they're like, no one cares about us. They don't care that we don't have tablets. They don't care that we don't have what we need. They don't care that we can't get to the laundromat. I said, well, if you need toothbrushes, you need anything, toothbrushes, pads, whatever you need, I'll go get it. I'll use my money. I'll go get it. I've some candidates that are running for in the at-large race, if they come in canvas, they've donated to the kids on my street. They donated gift cards because some residents just can't get to the grocery store. The people at my church, I attend Community of Hope Seventh-day Adventist Church. They've made masks. We've put together little PPE kits. Whoever's giving away free stuff, I go get it and I hand it out to my neighbors. That's kind of what I've been doing. If someone's giving out food, I go get a bag. I've been and then the other thing, I have a pet peeve of community in my classroom. If you drop something, I need you to help clean up. So I've been really on the kids. If I'm going to give you something for free, I need you to keep your community and pick up. So on Sunday, we're having a canvassing, a cleanup of the alley because we had someone was murdered in the alley near our home right here near Justin J. And it's really important to me to have a clean environment and to raise the property value and just the community value in self and property. Because I feel if we start there and we have kids really embracing themselves and their community, I feel like that'll be better for the next generation. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just trying to clean up Deanwood. And I'm on the ballot for ANC commissioner.
Thank you, Patricia. Many of the themes you all have already brought up just in this introductory question about kind of meeting the need and building rapport, and just first looking at the communities, the children, the families, the educators of school, and first saying, what do you need? And then how can I, as a personal, the personal level with other parents, with organization, even the DC government, how can we meet the needs? So I am just really excited about the conversation we're gonna have tonight. So as Kristen mentioned, we're gonna have some time for some questions that we've already kind of articulated, and at the end we'll open it up. Everyone watching, we invite you to put your questions in the chat, and we'll save time at the end for those questions at the chat. The way we will kind of proceed with the night is that I'll ask a question and I'll indicate the first panelist, so we won't have that awkward silence. I'll say these questions for you, but after that first panelist addresses the question, it's really open to anyone who want to contribute their answers to the question, all right? So our first question, actually, we're gonna start with Monique, if we may. The first question is kind of what have been the biggest obstacles you faced in your efforts to advocate for parents during this COVID-19 crisis? So like I said, we'll start with Monique, and after Monique shares her thoughts, anyone on the panel can answer the question. Monique.
Thank you. I started working with PAVE in December of last year. And so I was learning about how PAVE goes about its advocacy and ensuring that the parents of DC are able to get the information and the resources that they need. But with the COVID thing, when COVID came, we talked about meeting the moment, we kind of adjusted what we were already doing to meet the moment. So it was already important for children to have access to various school resources, but it became that much more important to have access to hotspots or to the Chromebooks or whatever they would need to be able to do the work. Not everyone has the printers at home to be able to print things, and and depending upon the jobs of the parent, everybody doesn't have the ability to be able to stay and work at home with their child or to work through things with them. So those were some of the things that were adjusted. Also, in terms of food security, okay, well, if the school is closed and you're not having the same kinds of access to the food, how do we ensure that the children are going to be able to have the food? In terms of mental health, if there are mental health issues or mental health needs or other needs that the child was having to be addressed at school, then how do we ensure and how do we advocate to ensure that the children were still going to be able to have those things available to them? So we just took what we were already doing and then looked at, okay, now that these things are not going to be going into the buildings, how then do we move from building focused advocacy to advocacy for where we are currently?
Other panelists who want to just address some of the obstacles they faced. Yes, LaShunda.
So I think that along the same lines, just as a result of COVID, I think one of the challenges has been just thinking and acting quickly, rightly, and thoughtfully all at the same time. Sort of walking and chewing gum all at the same time. And I think that, you know, because there's the need to sort of immediately address the challenges, I think particularly for students who, you know, for my office, students who are experiencing incarceration at this time, students who are system involved, right, or who are already, regardless of COVID-19 and the pandemic, are navigating a lot of really hard things, right? And so it's a sense of urgency, not because you know that these students are particularly vulnerable, but you also have to balance that with, are we putting in place the right things, right? Because sometimes when you act quickly, and you're just putting something in place, that doesn't mean it's the right fix. Is it actually getting to the solution? And then the third, and why I say thoughtfully, is that also, are we building for the future to be better, right? So are the things that we're putting in place right now as a result of just like, we got to respond because of COVID, is it putting us in a better position to better serve these students? One, if the pandemic continues, but two, when it ends, so that we come out with a better system and we're learning lessons, because the reality is that the challenges that we're seeing, especially with our most vulnerable students and families, pre-existed COVID-19 and just has been exacerbated by it. And a lot of people are just coming to terms with the fact that, oh, wait, there were some students we weren't quite serving well before, right? And now this is just getting worse. And I think that has been, I think that's just, and that's not unique to any stakeholder in this work. I think that's just the balance. Like, how do you act quickly? How do you make sure you're acting rightly? Like you're doing the right thing, it's the right intervention, and that you're building for the future and you're being thoughtful. And I think technology is a perfect example of that, right? So the first example, the first reaction is like, okay, so we got to get every kid a laptop or a tablet. Oh, wait, you don't have internet? We got to get you a hotspot. Oh, wait, who's going to pay for that hotspot? You need internet beyond just 3 months, right? 6 months. You actually, like, who's going to pay for it the rest of the year, right? And then you realize, oh, wait, like Monique was mentioning, there's things you have to print out. You don't have a printer, right? Or something that came up last week, someone mentioned to me, they're like, so if you give me a laptop and it doesn't have a Microsoft Office license to it, and I have to write a paper, and I am a GED student, right? Like I may not be connected to an LEA or a school or whatever, so I'm not getting this whole package, but I'm getting this donation. I don't know how to get the Microsoft license to fill out a resume, and you know, like, but these are things that we learn during the process, and it just kind of makes you encounter those challenges. But I think that that's really the balance that we've been trying to strike. Is like we're thinking and acting quickly, rightly, and thoughtfully.
Thank you. And LaShunda, something you mentioned really was kind of this intersection of disparity and inequity and challenges that actually pre-existed COVID, right? And that COVID is really exacerbating for many of our families. I wonder, Maura, if you can think about and share with us some of maybe the projects that you have supported or what you've heard about from your partners and the way they may be specifically supporting that intersection, maybe families with multilingual learners or families who are supporting students with disabilities. And could you speak a little bit about the work there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, LaShunda, you said this so well, that the underlying inequities and disparities have just become heightened in this crisis. And so I think equitable response means really thinking deeply and from multiple perspectives about these issues and committing to get better as we learn more. So with the example of students and families for whom English may not be their first language, What we learned is that even as resources were becoming available through schools about access to food, let's say, if those were not available through channels where families could read and understand or listen and hear in their native language to how to access those services, then if you're a family without internet at home, without a device, tweeting something does not help you figure out where you're supposed to go, even if it's tweeted in your native language. And so I think it's really being cognizant of the barriers that might exist and committing to what will it take to ensure that all of our students are getting the resources and the support that they need. In terms of how that's translated into projects, we've tried to sort of understand the magnitude of need, and I'll just use devices and technology as an example. We didn't actually know prior to the crisis how many of our students had home internet. So there's a data gap just to begin with. And then the city has really committed to trying to get that data. But of course, trying to get that data in a pandemic when families are definitionally disconnected, right? How do you know if you don't have home internet, if you're not able to safely interact with someone in person? These challenges have just compounded. And so what we've tried to do is provide immediate support, like purchasing laptops, but also think, as LaShunda said so well, about the long-term issues, like can we redeploy federal funds to support in-home internet access for families? So the city has now set up a partnership between Comcast and RCN. Any family that qualifies for TANF or SNAP benefits is able to access internet at home for free. It's a great program, and it's really important that we get the word out. So we're now providing grants to community organizations, including groups like PAVE, where they can actually be getting the information directly to constituent groups, meeting them where they already are, not asking families to do one other thing, show up one other place. We need to really make sure that we're getting to families where they're already going to be. And then again, as another example of how this compounds, one of the things we learned is that families who are undocumented don't qualify for the city's free internet program because of some rules at Comcast and RCN around having a social security number. So now we're working with an organization called Many Languages, One Voice, and they are purchasing hotspots, which therefore don't require the contracts and the social security numbers that in-home internet can. And we are advocating with the city to figure out how to make that a more inclusive and expansive program as they look to provide at-home internet as a right for all families in DC and not a privilege for some. So those are some of the kinds of projects we're kind of taking on, but they've been very much, multi-layered. We, for example, helped to fill the device gap in the spring for students who are connected to the juvenile justice system, but that's a population that's dynamic and changing all the time. And so you can't just meet the moment in March or in April. You have to make sure the organizations are actually set up so that the day that a student leaves a correctional facility, they are given a laptop. You're not waiting until they can get re-registered in school and then hopefully have a laptop from there, but that we're really thinking about our most vulnerable children first, and thinking about how they're going to be walking through the world and how to provide those kinds of supports and services to them.
Thank you. One of the things you mentioned in the way that you're thinking about your response, Maura, is thinking about the diversity of experience that families are having. And Monique, can you share a little bit about what you're hearing from families, perhaps thinking that how we met the moment in March, and are they feeling something different? Has there been progress in the way we've launched this school year from the family's point of view? And then also maybe Monique, after you share, Patricia, if we can hear about from an educator's point of view, what was different about March and then the start of this school year now that we're virtual?
Sure. Very early on, we heard from families who had multiple children and multiple grades, and they might have only had one additional computer in the household and a phone. And so, the parents are working from home, but how do you, maybe your job has given something, but, how do you manage what you need to do along with your multiple, like someone in our particular ward group had 5 children. Okay, she did not have 5 different things for her children in different schools. And so what I've seen thus far this year are schools stepping up to provide the Chromebooks or whatever for each child, not relying upon necessarily what the household already has, and then also providing staggered times so that parents, if you're able to help your child, you don't have to worry about, all of them being at circle time or homeroom or whatever at the same time. So I think there's a lot more recognition in the fall rather than the spring, because everybody was just kind of flying by the seat of their pants. And so being a lot more thoughtful at this point as to how we can do things to make it work for everyone. Also in terms of food being offered, making that something that's available for everyone at the school location where you can go and pick that up, where that's something that was addressed at the outset. And so I think that, again, just having more time to reflect on the issues that came up in the spring. Another thing that I've seen are families who've been much more pleased with the recognition that not all parents have the same work schedule. So for instance, at my daughter's school, there's a circle time in the morning, there's closing circle in the afternoon. Children can do one or the other, because they recognize that some people have shift work and the kinds of things that won't permit them to do one or the other. And there's also the recording of the classes so that they can meet the needs of various kinds of families and custodial arrangements and all of that kind of thing. And so I think there's just a lot more of that I've heard that has made it better for families this year so far.
Yes, thank you. Patricia, from an educator's point of view, maybe thinking about how things launched in March and how they launched in this fall, what has been your experience and the experience of your colleagues?
The experience, I will speak for myself first. The day that we closed, the next day we actually buried a colleague. So I wasn't ready to address her loss, because that was like my ride or die. That was, that was she was a very good friend. So I wasn't ready. It was very raw in March. So once April 1st rolled around, I was determined to just fall all in, so to speak. I kept asking parents. The biggest thing I always asked was, how can I support you? What do you need? At the end of class, I would always say, okay, friends, I need to hear from mom and dad. How are you feeling? What do you need? Is there I would tell them, I said, I know this is a public school, but do you want me? Is there anything that you want me to pray about? Do you want to have a meditative moment? Do you want to do a breathing exercise? I really focused on the parent, the person, and how they were feeling. What I've noticed since is that there's a lot of dads at home with children now. We're seeing more fathers I wouldn't say stepping up, I would say recalibrating their approach to education and being more empathetic to what their partner or their wife or their co-parent are doing with the children. And they're taking a more active voice and saying, I don't think they're actually speaking up. The biggest thing between March and now, a dad, I was so proud of him. He usually doesn't have anything to say. He said, my child, we were talking about feelings this week, and he said, oh, my son is never scared. I'm raising him to be a Black man, but he's not scared. I said, oh, well, Dad, I have 2 boys too. And it's okay to be scared as long as you recognize that feeling. He said, you know what? And he said, thank you for telling me that. So since DCPS is pushing Reopen Strong, when we did the trainings, they focused on the mental health of us as educators. And I thought, you know what? The parents need the same support. So I kept saying, am I being empathetic? Am I putting myself in their shoes? Am I seeing it from their point of view? Because working with children with cognitive needs, sometimes their parents have a cognitive delay as well. So we've really gotten creative. When I say we've tried out Flipgrid, Google Classroom, Microsoft Teams, Nearpod, Seesaw, Desmos. I started trying Desmos to show math because it's easier. When I say I just tried platforms. So I'm thankful that they're more open to talk about their feelings, because that's like, now we can say, you know what, this happened, but let's be proactive in our approach moving forward. So I really like how LaShunda, Maura, even Monique, how you're like, you know what, we need to think how this is going to affect us, not just now, but say 5 years down the road. So thank you, ladies.
Thank you, Patricia. I love the idea of recalibrating their approach, right? And I think each of you, when you're sharing the work that when COVID happened in the field of in the community, in the field of education, we all had to recalibrate our approach. And something else, I just want to pick up on something else you brought up, which is the social emotional needs of teachers, of families, of learners in all of the different contexts that we find ourselves in. So I wonder if we could start maybe with you, LaShunda, we're thinking about how are you approaching the social emotional needs of the students and families that you serve?
So I think that is paramount, specifically for our office. You know, as I said before, we focus targeted like a laser on students who are system involved. So those are students who already have experienced really high levels of trauma before COVID-19. They're also the students who are going to be disproportionately impact them and their families impacted by COVID-19. So they're the folks, you know, and families in DC that are getting sick, right? That are losing, you know, their lives and the lives of their loved ones. And then on top of that, you have students who are experiencing incarceration at this time, which in and of itself is incredibly traumatizing, regardless of what's happening in the outside world. So, you know, imagine being a kid who's incarcerated right now in DC, whose family lives in a community where you're feeling the impact, not just in terms of health, but in terms of employment, money, whatever, housing. Your family is experiencing the impact of COVID-19 and you're sitting and you're incarcerated, right? All of these things compound. This is the compounding trauma of inequality, right? That's compounded by COVID. And I think that one of the things that we are actively, you know, trying to figure out and problem solve is like, you want to make sure, obviously, our priorities to ensure that the quality of remote education to those students is the highest quality, right? Like they're getting the services and supports that they need to continue with their education, regardless of what's happening with the pandemic. And that's a commitment that I know that our office has made and that the district has made, and I'm proud of that. I think that also the other thing that we're trying to make sure that we're addressing for these students is just the need for not just trauma informed, but trauma responsive services and supports to them right now, so that they can learn and just so that they can be, you know, not just obviously physically healthy during this time, but mentally healthy, and to address some of their social emotional needs through supplemental supports and programming. And I think that is something that we've really hunkered down on as we've entered this school year, is how can we build out those additional supports and also make sure that they're receiving the related services that they need from their schools, from their LEAs during this time. Because, you know, particularly for the students that we serve, we know that they were dealing with a lot before COVID. And so now, you know, it's a lot to take in as a kid. And I think that one of the things that I'm really proud of from our office and from the DME is that, you know, our mission is really in our name, students in the care of DC. That is very intentional that we say that, right? Because what that says is that it puts the charge on us, on me, I guess, as executive director of the office, to say, what would you do for a child who's in your care right now that you love, right? And what does that look like? How does that love show up in a system and in what we're providing them, right? Because when you love someone, you can't sleep at night knowing that they're incarcerated and they're struggling and we're expecting them to show up in front of a laptop ready to learn, right? You want to do something about that. And I won't sit here and say that we have a perfect plan for how to solve for it. I think that we are actively working with partners in, DYRS and CFSA and DCPS and the public charter schools and any stakeholder who will, to try to help us figure that out and to make sure, again, that we're putting in place things that actually can really support students during this time. And I will say that, in the work so far, the Education Forward, the Education Equity Fund has been a really fantastic partner. So you mentioned specifically the funds to DYRS. We're incredibly grateful for that. In addition, funds were provided to CFSA students as well, students who are in the child welfare system as well through the Education Equity Fund, and has really been, I think that move of resources can't be understated in terms of its value and its importance and impact. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, LaShunda. And with that, we'll actually try to share this question also with you, Maura. Think about maybe some of the projects you've supported in addition to what LaShunda just said, or maybe the schools or other programs that maybe had to pivot to focus on the social emotional needs, maybe of the students, families, or educators.
Yeah, so what I've seen since March is very quickly a focus on the mental health and the social emotional needs of students and of adults. And it's not surprising. I think in DC, we have an incredible group of teachers who take their own commitment to their kids, but also to their own professional growth really seriously. And it's something that the city has invested in deeply. And so many schools were already working on social emotional learning and mental health in schools long before this crisis. It's something that the parents at PAVE have been advocating for years. And because of that advocacy, some of those resources were actually available in public funding when this crisis hit. Nowhere near what we need, but I think it's an example of why advocating for issues around inequity just becomes that much more important in these kinds of crises. So DCPS, for example, and Patricia, maybe you could speak to this a bit. My understanding is that they, when they set up professional development in June, they decided to end the school year early. They focused some of that time on mental health and wellness for adults and for students. There's also a group of schools that are part of what's called the Whole Child Collaborative. And this is really taking a model that Van Ness Elementary School in Navy Yard has created. And for those of you who don't know the school, Cynthia Robinson Rivers is an incredibly talented leader, and she has really thought about how to center students and their experience from a mental and social emotional health, but also a self-regulation and self-management perspective, and to organize the whole school day around that. There's now a group of schools that are learning this model that's been pioneered at Van Ness, and as they pivoted to the crisis, they started to think differently too about you can't just take what you did in a classroom and turn it into Zoom. So I think those lessons are starting to get shared. What we did in terms of concrete projects was really very limited, in part because we saw the system investing in it. And so we saw that as a very good thing, like there were public resources available. But one of the things we did was for charter schools, and especially some of the smaller charter schools, they didn't necessarily have a lot of people who could dedicate their time to thinking creatively about this transition to remote learning because they weren't part of a big system. And this is one of the challenges of having so many LEAs in DC, so many organizations that run our schools. And so we provided grants to help with planning so that people could actually think about how they wanted to incorporate not just the academic skills, but also the support for adults and students in terms of their mental health. So that was a planning process that happened in June and July that kind of helped folks get ready for the school year. But honestly, from a grant making perspective, it hasn't been the thing that we've focused on most, not because we don't think it matters, but because actually we've seen people saying there are other needs because public funding is supporting at least some of the beginnings of mental health. We are pulling together a coalition of funders to invest in school-based mental health. This is something we've been working on for a couple of years now. But we feel like in the philanthropic community, there's understanding about the importance of mental health, but not about the intersection of that in schools and how to think about not just crisis supports for students who might need therapy or counseling, but actually building a supportive environment within schools that recognizes this and equips all of our kids to be ready. And so we're hoping that we've continued that work, and we're hoping that that's going to help strengthen our response as students do return to school for in-person learning, and that we can really help build community and connection between our kids who have not been able to be in the same place together since March.
Thank you, Maura. Monique, can you speak to, I mean, Maura mentioned the advocacy PAVE's been doing around parent kind of demand for social emotional support for their learners in schools. Can you speak to the needs for social emotional support for parents? Like, what are you hearing through your organization from the other parents about their adult needs?
Well, through PAVE, certainly there has been continued conversation around mental health and just community, having community that continues whether you're actually in front of one another. And so sharing tips among the parents that are involved as, you know, things that they've been using to help with themselves or help with manage their kids' emotions. That's been really something that's been important. We just share those things. Also, even within the school, I've seen where there have been parent circles that have formed and parents are kind of sharing of, you know, okay, I have a 5-year-old, you know, they're having difficulty with being in front of a computer. And so, you know, what things are you doing to work to help them and to understand their difficulty, you know, for it's hard to be in front of Zoom for an extended period of time. So, you know, for younger children, there are. So just, you know, using tips and sharing and just fostering community, even though we can't be around each other. And so PAVE has been excellent with that. Mental health, like Maura said, was certainly something that was very, very important with PAVE. And so we've continued to advocate for mental health, particularly once the children return, and you can expect that there are going to be issues that come with, you know, fear arising from being perhaps on campus or just self-regulation in terms of I haven't seen children in a very long time. You know, how do we deal with that, with the teachers also and the feelings that they may have. So we're preparing ourselves to for the next phase that will come once children and teachers return to the schools.
Thank you, Monique. Patricia, Monique brought up the idea about the next phase, like when we actually return strong. Maybe can you share with us a little bit about, from an educator's point of view, what educators are doing now to think about maybe the social emotional learning of their students, but they're all their own mental health and support they may need to return strong when schools return in person learning.
So what the educator focused on self, as I, you know, call me selfish, but you can't pour from an empty glass. I don't know if you can hear me because it's, oh, okay. Is that better? Okay. We focused on sleep hygiene. These curtains behind me, they're actually blackout curtains. I put them in, say a week into when we first, because I wasn't sleeping good. We lost parents. Parents that I potty trained their children. I watched their kids graduate and learn how to finally, this one particular child, he always wanted to physically, you know, express himself with his hands rather than with his words. And he had finally started to self-regulate and recognize that, hey, I need to calm down. I need a break. To find out that his mom and her sister lost their lives in a domestic violence. Sleep hygiene was important. Mental self-care was important. Taking the time to say, you know what, I need a break. To yes, I personally, what we've been doing, been holding each other accountable. We've had water challenges. Hey, are you still drinking your water today? Did you meet your goal? Did you get at least 8 hours of sleep? Just these check-ins with one another. Because we kept saying, you know, we don't know what we're going to walk into. We don't know if we have to go back or when we go back. We just need to be prepared. And that's been the approach that we've been taking. My biggest concern for my fellow educators and even myself is when, right, I would say not even an hour before, I read online that, you know, they're considering really reopening the schools come the second term. And it kind of made me sick, because when I went and looked in where I work and in my class around the school, I saw a lot of things that I felt that just weren't addressed from, you know, a cleaning standpoint and whatnot. So I was like, are we really ready? You know, that was the biggest, like, are we ready? You know, we keep saying only when it's safe, but how do we know it's safe? You know, we can't stay home forever, but at the same time, how it, my son, my kindergartner, when he doesn't see people on camera, they don't turn on their camera, they don't come. He's like, mommy, oh my goodness, I didn't see my friend today. He gets worried. He was like, I think something happened. And I'm like, calm down. Maybe they had a tech issue, you know. So I really hope that going into this next phase of the fall, that we really just take a time to say, you know what, I need more time. I need a break. I need a day off. I need some extra sleep. Because if we don't do that, then how can we pour from an empty cup? We can't help anyone else, and we can't help ourselves. So that's what I really want for myself and for my fellow educators.
Thank you, Patricia. And something that Patricia, both you and Monique mentioned was this idea of self-care, but self-care in community. Monique mentioned that some of the parents feel like they need a sense of community. You mentioned you and your colleagues, you know, you're building the sense of community with the, you know, are you sleeping, checking in and having challenges that are fun and engaging, you know, just to check in and see how we're all doing in preparation for what we know is the next stage, right? So if we're thinking about something, LaShunda and Maura, you mentioned that we have to prepare for the now and really engage into the now, but with an eye toward the next. I wonder if each of you can talk about maybe what the future might hold, or kind of how you're preparing for that. What kind of innovations are you thinking about? The ways that you're also wrestling with that tension of the now and the next. And Maura, can we start with you?
Yeah, so this is very much a question that's on our minds. And I think one specific example of it is the issue of how families are navigating remote learning at home, and how the level of resources and privilege that families had to begin with could actually exacerbate achievement gaps really in both directions. So folks may have seen this, that many families who have money are choosing to create learning pods. And so they're hiring teachers or they're hiring tutors. They may also feel safe in their own home to invite other children, or safe sending their children to other people's homes. And that's a privilege that not everybody has. And so, you know, for very good reasons that I certainly understand, people are trying to do right by their kid. And that looks like creating a community and getting some support so that students can really thrive. And that's not an opportunity that's available to all of our kids. And so I think left unchecked, what I imagine happens is that at whatever point we return to in-person school in a safe way, we could expect to see children from an academic perspective who are in those pods, maybe even accelerating beyond where they would have been had they been in school. And I say that because we know schools play a lot of different functions, and you're not doing 6 hours a day of academic skills if you're in school. But if you're getting tutored with 6 other kids, like, man, that's a lot of time for reps at various academic skills. Socially, I think there's still going to be tremendous challenges. But anyway, so I think those kids may actually excel past where they would have otherwise been. And then we know that there's a lot of issues with access to remote school. And some kids, I think, are really thriving in a virtual environment. The self-directed component, the lack of distraction with their peers for a group of kids can be very beneficial. But for many of our kids, for all the reasons that folks have described, this is just hard. You have to keep on a schedule. You got to log into different platforms. That's not something that a 5 or 6-year-old can navigate on their own. So we're trying to figure out what an equitable response is to pods that could provide immediate childcare and support But to the point of your question, with an eye towards how do we actually use some kind of learning pod support today to actually build confidence for families and for teachers that it is safe to go back? Or if it's not, let's learn that, and let's learn that in a really cautious and careful way with a very small group of kids, rather than, saying on November 9th, okay, we're reopened, and having buildings with hundreds of kids at the same time. So through LaShunda's office, we came to understand that CFSA, the Child and Family Services Agency, which oversees children in foster care, wanted to provide pod experiences for children in foster care whose foster parents work outside the home, and they might be working at home now, but the point is they can't necessarily support online learning for multiple kids. And so they have developed an approach to doing pods of 4 children. And we think we can learn from that and see, are there ways to safely bring back small groups of kids? Similarly, DCPS is thinking about homeless students and the unique needs that they have, and whether there's a way to safely bring small groups back. Charter schools, same thing. So we're trying to raise philanthropic support now for pods, but to not just do childcare today, but to think about how is this a bridge? So testing is another example of that. Should we do COVID testing for everybody who's in some kind of pod, and then figure out, is that a practice we'd actually want to do at scale as part of a safe return to school? Is it possible? How do you operationalize it? These things are really tricky, but that's some of what we're thinking about.
Yeah, thank you. Patricia.
So, Maura, I was just thinking, as a mom and as an educator, if we do, say, mass testing for everyone that returns for learning, what about their immunizations? We're worrying about COVID, but what about chickenpox, measles, mumps, MMR, all that? A lot of kids, some parents, they don't believe in vaccinations. They don't believe my child should get vaccinated. Some, even educators, some of my colleagues, they don't believe in vaccinations, and that's their right. There's religious exemptions and ways to get around it. However, with COVID, in my opinion, you would think that we would have air filtration systems placed in classrooms. They would have immediately bought them and said, oh, let me check the classroom and see if this window opens. In my classroom, I have to literally stand on a table, get and push up to open the window, and it only opens about that much. So God forbid it's a fire at the door, or I need ventilation in the room, it doesn't happen. So I personally, like, for instance, at Minor, we have Old Minor, big parking lot. We even have an outdoor classroom space that's already installed. I can't speak for my colleagues, but if I was a parent that sent my child to Minor, even at my son's schools, he's at John Burroughs Elementary School. They have a big outdoor space. They do community day every year. I would love to see if we possibly could consider using the outdoor space there at 1820 Monroe Street for outdoor learning. My son would love it. My son, he has an asthma action plan, but I'll say this. Since March, he has not needed his inhaler or nebulizer. I have controlled his diet. He hasn't taken in any dairy, so that has decreased his chances of having an asthma attack. So with that being said, my son's building, it has poor ventilation. I've worked in that building. It's hot. It's 30 degrees outside, but it's 85 inside Burroughs Elementary School. Have they done an HVAC assessment? I don't know. That's my fear. They want me to trust to send my son back, but I know all kids aren't vaccinated. I know that all kids, they don't necessarily have the hygiene standards that I have for my son and for my family. So as an educator and as a parent, I'm like, only when it's safe, eh? So, yeah.
Thank you, Patricia. I mean, there's a lot that's been shared tonight. We're thinking about kind of these concentric circles, even making decisions about how to do the best we can with learners and families and educators in the now and the next, thinking about facilities, thinking about healthcare, both pre-existing healthcare needs and our current healthcare needs. COVID's layering on top of that. Before we shift to maybe our final, I'll give us a final question, and then we can shift to some of the questions that are arising in the chat. Just think about kind of that concentric circle with an eye toward the future, and maybe what our strengths are. Like, what do you see the strengths really, and what the work that each of you are doing with advocating with parents, with being an educator, working on behalf of youth who are system engaged, and really the strengths of the projects that you're supporting, Maura, in your work. Talk about the strengths you have that you really feel like you yourself or your colleagues with the projects can really lean into as we go into the next phase, like as we go to really reopen strong or continue to support our learners and our families. Let's leave on an assets. Let's talk about your strengths as you look forward. Monique, can we start with you?
One of the things that I think was really an asset for PAVE was being very forward thinking in terms of mental health and really advocating that strongly before. And I think that that's going to continue to be even more important now than it was even in the past, because I think that it's going to touch more students because we don't understand fully the impact that COVID has had from abruptly leaving school in March to being home all this time and not having the perhaps the social and emotional development that you might have had you been in school, and problem solving, executive functioning, and all those kinds of things. And so I think that PAVE is really keenly aware before, and then we're primed to be continued to advocate for mental health. And I think that everyone outside of even the educational community, because of their own personal things that have happened, is a little bit more aware, you know, when you're isolated about, you know, the importance of mental health. And so I think that that will make DC and perhaps the federal government more receptive to advocacy for mental health. And so I look forward to seeing the gains that could be made in that regard. Also, I think that there had already been inequity in the schools in terms of, like what Patricia was mentioning, HVAC concerns. And I think that because of COVID and because everyone recognizes the importance of the air that we're breathing and you know, filtration needs, hopefully we will be able to have more equity throughout all of the buildings, even some of the much older buildings, to ensure that all of our students are going to be able to breathe clean, healthy air that is going to help facilitate the students and teachers and staff being in the building all day.
Thank you, Monique. Let's end with the strengths that you feel like you have in the work you're doing as we move forward. We'll wrap up with Patricia, LaShunda, and then Maura. Patricia?
I would say the strengths are tomorrow at Minor Elementary, 601 15th Street. We're having another community table in conjunction with the equity team, the PTO, and I want to say the garden club. So we have a school garden. We've been really reaching out and trying to connect with parents if they need headphones, if they need hotspots, if they need grocery carts, whatever the need may be. We want to address them in person, or if we have to do a no contact pickup or drop off. So that to me is the strengths that we're creating a greater sense of community. We're strengthening that community arm that say, hey, you need help? Hey, I'll pick you up. Here's a hand. So instead of getting handouts, we're giving people a hand up in life. So that to me is the positive strengths of this. People are more willing, in my opinion, to accept help and to ask for help, because someone mentioned, you know, you can say, oh, we have IEP, we have this, we have that. But if you're not aware of all these things as a parent, and these are an option to you, you don't know. You don't know that these resources are available. People like PAVE, Maura, Miss LaShunda, these intersections where people run into, it's like, oh my gosh, which way do I go? So I'm glad that we have created maybe a better Google Maps or community map for people to follow. So to me, that's the strength that we're going to build off of.
Sense of the community as a strength. That's excellent. LaShunda.
So I would say, that we now have a real opportunity as a result of COVID to be bold and to try new tools to address inequity, to advance justice, to really push ourselves to think about what it is that we need to do to create a better system on the other side of this. And recognizing that we're learning and we're applying those lessons as we go during these really just unprecedented times. But I think that what encourages me, what keeps me going from our office and in this work is that, the students in the care of DC, the deputy mayor for education, the mayor and the district, I think have made a commitment to not just responding in this moment, but figuring out how we can do the longer term work of recovery, of supporting students in really targeted ways, and addressing any type of learning loss or where the gaps might be as a result of the pandemic. And so what really keeps me going and encourages me for the future is that I've seen a real commitment from government agencies, from community-based partners, from teachers, from parents, from communities saying like, let's figure this out together. And recognizing that this is really hard. It's hard emotionally, it's hard physically. I've lost family members to COVID, loved ones to COVID. I've had people close to me, lose jobs and regardless of eviction or no eviction, have housing instability during this time. People are living real lives and really hard lives right now. And I think that what is important, I think, especially as, an office in government, is to remember that, particularly for our students who are child welfare involved or touch the justice system, again, they are still in our care. And so everything that we do, everything we put in place, if it's a policy, a resource, a grant, a program, an intervention, we got to center caring and love and resources, not just love, but also resources, real things that change people's lives and get things in their hands that they need during this time. And that's hard work, but I'm happy to be in it with all of you.
Thank you. Thank you. And the ethic of caring is very strong in the field of education. We know that through the literature and through the practices that you all are involved in. Maura, help us transition to the questions from the chat and just talk about your strengths and the strengths you see, maybe the programs and projects that you support that we can use to look forward, to innovate.
Yeah, I mean, I think at our core, this is really about our students being known and being seen. And that comes from our educators who pour themselves into their students every day. And like with that at the core, there is so much we can do. It is about resources then, right? Are we giving our educators the resources and support to be able to act on what they know about our kids and what their passions are and what their needs are? But I think that this crisis is, in some cases, strengthening the connection because these circumstances are so amplified, but also families are literally at the table, right? They are hearing what teachers are teaching, and that creates a different kind of feedback loop. So I think there's real opportunity in that as a city. When we think about it as an organization about how can we build on strengths to support quality and equity in the long term, I think it's really going to be about following where our students are leading us. I'm watching like my niece and nephew, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's not great for them to be on Zoom all day, blah, blah, blah. And that's true. But they're also like, I'm going to unmute you. I'm going to chat you. Like, I'm going to open this thing. Like they are figuring this out, right? And so, they're going to come back to school as different learners. And I think there's going to be an expectation that school is not necessarily, in middle and high school, 7 42-minute periods a day and lunch is 5 minutes and whatever. I think they're going to say like, hey, wait, I was able to do my work at my own pace and get more recess time. Or, when I finished my assignment, I got to make a choice about what I wanted to do. And so they're going to have different expectations of us. And I think that's a real strength that's going to push us to say, we can be more creative. We can think about this differently. School doesn't have to look like it used to. And if we're able to work on some of the underlying inequities, like kids having one-to-one devices, like kids having internet at home, those are enablers then of the creativity that our kids are going to demonstrate. So I think that's a real strength for us.
Great, thank you. Thank you, panelists. That's we're going to shift now. We have a lot of questions in the chat, probably more than we'll have time to get to, but I want to highlight some of the themes that are coming in the chat. So many of the questions in the chat really want to circle back to something we did address earlier, was this COVID really highlighting other nexuses of intersections of oppression and of struggle and challenge with our students and their families, right? So another social context that we have while we're having the pandemic of COVID is also the pandemic about racism that's going on, and how we have the manifestation of racism along multiple lines, right? So the inequities we can draw to social identities along race, class, disability, language, citizenship status, right? Particularly make you think about, share with us anything you have about what your community, the work you're doing or the work you're supporting is really going to go beyond COVID, but also to get at some of these other systemic inequalities, particularly around race, class, language, and citizenship. Let's see, can we start maybe with LaShunda with talking about maybe some of those intersections and how the work you do specifically targets those intersections?
Yeah, I've been doing mostly in the justice space, specifically juvenile justice work for a while now. You can't do justice work to me if you're not about racial justice work. It's not separate, it's not apart, it's not a different thing, it is the work. So for me, coming into leading the Office for the Students in the Care of DC, the reality is that nationally, this is not something unique to the District of Columbia, disproportionately these systems are made up of Black children, Black bodies, Black families, and families of color, and families who are identified as lower income, right? But particularly, we're talking about Black bodies, Black children, brown children. And so for me, that is just always at the center. And it's important, I think, particularly whether you're talking about child welfare or juvenile justice in the criminal justice system, to name that explicitly, because I think that it should center the way in which you respond. And I think it also, for the people who are making decisions about how to fix that thing, it challenges you to make sure that you have the right people who can answer those questions and figure that out with you at the table, right? And pushing systems to move beyond just saying, thank you so much for your input, parent. Thank you so much. It's great to hear from students today. Or teacher, it's so nice that you had that thought that you shared. And then there's like never any follow-up, there's never any additional engagement, right? But to really take seriously the idea that if we are going to course correct for what is deeply embedded historical inequity, right? If we are truly to be committed to dismantling white supremacy and the way it shows up both explicitly, sure, cool, whatever, but more importantly, at least for my job, in working within a system in government, how it shows up implicitly in the ways in which we create policies and programs and allocate resources, that we cannot do that separate and apart from the communities that are directly impacted by those inequities. We should not be making those decisions without them, right? And without that leadership, without that input. And, my office is relatively new, but in the way in which, I'm hoping to continue to build it is to center that as a key part of the work. Like we can't move forward if we haven't engaged directly with students who are experiencing incarceration right at this time. Like if you've never talked to a student who is receiving remote education, in an incarceral setting right now, but you're trying to figure out a solution to how to make sure that, they're getting what they need, well, the problem starts right there. Sit down and talk to the kid. Say, how are you experiencing this right now? And so for me, that's what that work looks like the question to me is like, of course. If we're doing systems, working in child welfare and juvenile justice and criminal justice, and you're not talking about race, then you're doing something wrong. If you're not focusing on racial justice, you're not doing the work. And you're doing probably a little more grandstanding than you are real systemic change. And that's a challenge for me, right? That's a challenge for me as a leader. That's a challenge for me as someone who works in government, to check myself and to create those systems of accountability for my office and for myself to say, all right, is this really reflective of what we're really trying to dismantle in the long term? And so that requires that level of accountability along the way. But that would be my my response to your question about that in relation to our work.
Thank you. Monique, what about in relation to what PAVE is doing? How are they, we know we're focused on COVID, but we know that COVID actually exacerbates the pre-existing oppression and challenges we have, particularly around racism and experience of race in this country. Talk to us about your work at that intersection.
Well, I think that one of the important things about PAVE is to inform the parents that we touch. So much of what goes on in an educational system are because of parents who don't know what's available to them, parents who don't know about how to advocate for certain things. Your child is entitled to certain things if they have an IEP, if they have certain plans, certain needs. But yet, if a parent doesn't know that, then how do they go about getting that for their child? And then the child ends up having issues in class and put out, and that's because the child did not have what they needed to be in the classroom. So I think at the forefront with PAVE and its advocacy is working with parents and outreach to ensure that parents know what their child is entitled to so that the child can remain in the classroom. One of the things that I thought of while LaShunda was speaking was, that and I'm sure I'm going to butcher this quote, but the tide, when the tide comes in, everyone rises. Every ship rises. I'm sure I'm killing that. But anyway, I just thought of that just because we want to make sure that we reach out to all of our kids. When all of our kids are performing and accessing the things that they need from the educational system, we all do better. It's collective. And I think one of the things that COVID should have shown us is the importance of community. And so when something is happening in one part of the city, people won't just stay in that part of the city. They move all over the place. People move around. So it's important to ensure that we advocate with the city to ensure that all of the wards have what they need, particularly the wards that have been historically left behind. And then also to ensure that the parents who are in the areas where they don't know about all of the things that could be attainable for their child, they're made aware of that. And I think that's the important work that PAVE is doing.
Thank you. Some other questions that are arising in the chat are really also pushing around this intersection of inequity, the intersection of challenge that many other families are facing. Particularly, this speaks to a little bit about the innovative work you were discussing earlier, Maura, about the idea that COVID-19 might exacerbate existing achievement gaps or opportunity gaps when it comes to measurements and outcomes for students, particularly around school assessments. So if maybe we can start with you, Maura, about the way some of the projects you're supporting might be thinking about assessment of students and really how we're not only maybe trying to close the opportunity gaps that might be exacerbated, but what are we thinking about how we're going to assess the students when they come back?
Yeah, I think the question of assessment is a really complicated one. Even in regular circumstances, there is not broad agreement about what are we assessing, why are we assessing it, is it actually telling us something about this child as a learner, or is it telling us about the inputs and supports and the resources that we provided to that child as a community. So, in COVID, I think this debate is only elevated and amplified in terms of being really complicated. I think rightly the city canceled the Park exam, which is our state exam, the big high stakes test, in April. And now I think there's a really open question about what happens with that kind of high stakes moment in the future, because I don't think anyone thinks it's a great use of kids' time to be doing standardized tests when they've missed so much learning. And I think from an equity perspective, we want to know how our kids are doing and we want to support them. So I think using formative assessment this school year, which is assessments that might be on a more regular basis that are used to help inform adult decisions, right? So it's not a summative assessment of how much did this kid learn now that I'm at the end of the year, but okay, I just taught this lesson this week. How do I know who got it and who didn't? What do I need to reteach? What other supports might I need to put in place? I think those formative assessments are really critical, because as educators, we don't have the same set of tools right now that we normally have, right? Like normally it's like, you see a kid put their head on their desk, or you see them like, you know, frustrated when they're trying a problem, and you're able to walk over and to nudge and support and to help. And if a kid has their camera off, or if you're not looking at that little screen in that moment, you just might miss that moment to know who's struggling, you know, right in that second. And so I think we have to be more creative about formative assessments, but really first answer our why. Like, what am I going to do with this information? And if I'm not sure how I'm going to act on it, then, you know, maybe it's not worth doing. I think as a city, if we want to answer questions in aggregate about the resources that our kids need, we could do some kind of assessment, but maybe it's not every kid for hours, right? Maybe we find a way to lift up some of these formative assessments to find some patterns, or maybe we do a more of a higher stakes assessment, but for a sample of kids, for a very small number of questions. If we know we're actually going to act on the information and make a different budget decision because of it, or make a different policy decision because of it. So I think that's a threshold question we have to answer as a city first, which is how do we want to act on the information we get from assessments? And then therefore, what kinds of assessments are going to help answer those questions? I think also thinking about universal screening in terms of mental health is going to be critically important when our kids get back. We don't know what we don't know about the situations and the circumstances for all of our young people. And so I think universal screening alongside academic assessments can be a helpful tool to really think about wraparound services and supports in a return to in-person learning.
Thank you. And some of that goes back to something, Patricia, you mentioned earlier about just the social emotional support that the students and the family needs. Can you speak from an educator's point of view about how maybe educators might be thinking right now, what assessment could look like and what it should look like, given the inequities that we may find that are outcomes of this COVID-19 crisis?
So, LaShunda and Monique was speaking, I was thinking of an academic leadership team meeting I was in yesterday, and they were like, Stamper, why are you giving suggestions to give us more work? I'm like, well, we're trying to capture when students actually log on. In Teams, you can capture the attendance data right at the end. You can show us when kids log in, log out. You put it in an Excel spreadsheet, it downloads, you can send it to the administrator. But then someone has to take all that data and reformat it to, you know, for the instructional superintendent, for the higher ups. So that does add in an extra layer of work. However, it does capture a moment in time. It shows, okay, this child did log on for this amount of time, but was the child engaged? You can't tell that unless the child has his camera on, the child is talking, you're looking at the child, you know, you actually have your glasses. I wanted to bring this to a point because there were some educators like myself that actually wear glasses or contacts. I didn't have mine. They were ready in March, but I didn't get them until June. So I only had one pair of contacts. My eye, you know, these were like legitimate issues. So a lot of time the kids thought I was upset because I'm like this at the screen. They're like, Miss Stamper, why are you doing that? I'm like, no, I'm fine, guys. I'm just trying to make sure you guys are okay. And so how do we how do we test, how do we assess? I know we do beginning of the year data, mid-year data, end of year data, but I feel like we need to do just how Maura said, weekly data. Check for understanding. Hey guys, do you understand that if we take 4 and add 2, that's 6? How did you get that? I think the way that we approach them, we need to recalibrate even the way, the pedagogy and how we teach, because now we're entering a whole new frontier. So checking for understanding might not necessarily mean a child telling it back to you. A sped student may not be able to tell you they know 4 + 2 is 6, but they can show you because they don't have the verbiage. Same thing with the parent. I just want to point out, there's adults that aren't necessarily on the reading level that they need to be to read the surveys that are being sent to them, that are being mailed to them. So they may need accommodations and more care, as you said it, LaShunda, and understanding what is being presented to them. And even how Maura said, there's families that aren't, English isn't their native language, so they don't know how to access these things. So I just feel that just how they've created the new office for deaf and hard of hearing here in DC, I feel that we're going to need maybe a like a reopen strong department. I don't know how that would work per se, but I'm apprehensive about returning because I'm really worried about how it's going to look and how our students, even my colleagues and educators, are going to respond. But I'm going to stay positive.
Thank you. And the idea that we need to recalibrate maybe, not just our approach to teaching, but also our approach to assessment using data that's actionable and maybe comes on at a more frequent level, that's really in the commitment and the will to act on it. So maybe rethinking these summative assessments and thinking about the formative assessments and thinking about the different ways we even assess and gather data from our constituents, from our families, from our educators, and from our students. Thank you very much. So I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions from the chat, if that works for everyone. The first one really gives us an opportunity to have a thought experiment. So I'm going to throw this out, and I'm going to just welcome anyone to be the first to respond. This question reads, if it was a perfect world, how would you describe a school system that that includes absolute education equity? And thinking about it from an intersectional lens. So thinking about it from all these different social identities, different social experiences, experiences of racism, interactions with systems, language diversity, social economic diversity, health diversity, cognitive diversity. We're going to think about the way that we are fully human in this city. How would you describe a school system that focuses on equity? So this is a thought experiment. You can dream big at this time. So who's first? Patricia, you want to start us off?
So I keep thinking about a program that actually really helped me, United Friends of the Children. Little do you guys know that I was awarded the state of California from birth until I emancipated at 18. However, California, being a progressive state that it was, never allowed me to be in the care of my mother because she was intellectually disabled. Had I been in her care, I would never be the person I am today. And the family that raised me was a Seventh-day Adventist family in Southern California. And they were very important. Education, healthcare, and having a job or having some type of life skills were very important. I was partnered with an organization. I don't know if you may want to look it up, LaShunda. It's called United Friends of the Children. They followed me from when I was between 5th and 6th grade all the way throughout my undergrad. I got resources, LaShunda. They gave me money every time I advanced. They gave me incentives. I got to go on college tours. I told them, I don't want to go to college. They introduced me to other options. They exposed me. They gave me the exposure. So in my mind, an equitable system, I was provided healthcare. I was provided housing. I was provided education. The same issues that slaves had when they were given their freedom are the same issues our Black bodies and brown bodies are having today. Housing, unequitable housing, education, and healthcare. The disparities, boom, right there, drops the mic. Hey, let's address those issues, people. Let's create policies and programs to address that, because I believe if we address systematically and very intentionally address those issues, everything else will be addressed by doing so. So with me as a case study, so to speak, I don't know what would be the other end if I was in my mother's care. However, I know the state of California made me address my mental health. I had to go to counseling once a week. If I didn't go, my social worker and a police or someone came and found me. It was If I didn't go this week, I had to put in more time the next week. It was like, this is your job. You have to address your mental health. If you don't, that's a problem. If I didn't make doctor's appointment, they made me independent. They gave me the life skills that I needed when I was 18. When I left Compton and came here in August of 2004, I knew how to fill out my taxes. I filed my taxes. I knew where Social Security office was. I knew how to, if I needed food stamps, if I needed resources, I knew how to advocate for myself. I believe in a equitable school recalibrating education. We need to give children those life skills starting in early childhood, how to ask for help, how to say, I don't get it. I need help. I don't understand. And to be a community helper and a community builder. Where I graduated from Los Angeles Adventist Academy, Christian character builders. We wanted to build Christian character for the future and for the kingdom. That was the school. But at the same time, I feel like here, September 25th, 2020, we had the opportunity to really intentionally recalibrate education for the future. And I'm glad to talk to you guys today. You guys are very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. So LaShunda, let's go to you. Kind of, this is the time to think big.
No, I was going to say, well, first I have to say, Ms. Stamper, it sounds like you are probably a really great teacher, and every single one of your students is really blessed and fortunate to have you in the classroom. I can just tell from this conversation that you're the type of teacher that transforms kids' lives, and so thank you for what you do. And I think that and also thank you for sharing. I think that exactly what you described is where I was going in my thinking. Also, I just love it when people ask me to like think big, like think out of the box. You know, there's no restrictions, no limits. Because the two things immediately that came to mind to me is one is that to me, a transformative, equitable education system is one that wraps children and their families, right? And whatever services and supports they need in order to be in the best position to not just learn, but to thrive in the long term, right? Like we are wrapping them in services and supports, not capturing them, not surveilling them, not boxing them in, right? Because sometimes service interventions can end up being like surveillance and they don't really help, right? But they're actually supportive. So that's the first piece. And then the second is it's highly individualized. I would, in my dream universe, we would literally be able to sit down with every single kid and their family and say, what do you need? What do you need? Not just what do you need in terms of services, housing, mental health support, but literally what do you need in terms of curriculum, instruction, assessment, right? Well, you know, I remember having a conversation with a student, it's a different point in my career, different life that I had. And he stopped me. He was like, Miss LaShunda, this is good, but this isn't the way I learn. And I was young, you know, I didn't know. I was just kind of like, you know, I thought we were vibing. He said, this isn't how I learn. He was like, I think you're cool and everything, but the way I learn is I need to see it. And just seeing it on the paper, and even having you here, you know, reading to me, he was like, is there a way that we can make this, essentially was like, can you make this into something visual, right? I would have known that if I just wasn't sitting there with him, right? And one, you know, that I should have asked, right? And I think that and it's not impossible, I don't think, but to get to a point where we have an educational system to the degree that we can, that is that highly, I'd love to see us get to a point where it's that highly individualized, where we can work. And it's not just an understanding that learning is not just about that individual child, but it's also about their family, who they're attached to, right? Who's caring for them, who's parenting them, which isn't always, to your point, isn't always necessarily the biological parent, but like who is their community that's supporting them? And how can we bring them in, right? And to the degree that they need additional services and supports to show up for the student, how do we wrap that around them? Not capture them, not surveil them, right? Not limit them, but wrap around. And then how do we actually create systems and programs and policies that can ask that question and then respond to it, which is, what do you need? What do you specifically need in order to learn and in order to thrive? I don't know, you know, all of the steps to getting us there, but that would be my dream.
I love the vision. I love the vision, Patricia and you, LaShunda, are they're laying out for us. Let's wrap up with your big vision, Monique, and then Maura.
As I listened to Patricia and LaShunda, they kind of reinforced what I was thinking. I just had a word, which was holistic, understanding that the performance in the classroom is affected by everything. Did the child have something to eat that morning? Did the child, were they able to sleep peacefully in their home without violence or noise or an environment that's conducive to sleep? You know, are they well? Are they sick? Or just all of these things that impact your ability to learn, you know, and resources. You know, if you need something else, you know, can you get it? You know, because we all learn differently. That's one of the things I loved about Montessori. My daughter was doing Montessori before, and I really liked the individualized nature of it. And I think that it's something that continues to move forward, not necessarily Montessori education, but just meeting people where they are, you know, like the student who needed visual to be able to learn, or like, you know, for me, I used to study, I needed to listen to things and then to have some space, you know, so just really trying to figure out what works for each person and meet them where they are, and then without the judgment, because not everyone is meant to be on the same path. So if you decide for your path and for who you are and your giftings that you need to be on a more vocational or technical path, then we lay out all of that for you without judgment. And then if you are deciding that you want to do something that's maybe more artistic, you know, then we lay that out for you. So all of those kinds of things that address the whole student and their needs. And then when we get them to the point where they're learning, then we help them get to self-realization, self-actualization, their full self and what they need to do to be their best self.
Thank you. Maura, this is your turn. Kind of envision what education would look like if we're aimed toward equity and recognizing the intersectional social identities that we all have.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with so much of what's been said. And I'll just add that, you know, I think it's important to remember that our current public school system was really designed as a factory model, right? How do we prepare young people to work on an assembly line and to be good workers? And so that was about compliance. It was about memorizing a limited rote set of skills. It's such a different world than the world that our young people are entering. And it's not a system that starts with the question of who are our students and what do they need, as LaShunda said. So when I imagine a system that starts with that set of questions, what do students and families need and how do we know that? I think it's a system that encompasses a lot of what's already been said, but I'll just share a couple of examples about what I think this really individualized, flexible, highly supportive path could look like. I think we'd be really clear with kids about what the things are that we expect everybody to learn and know, but then adults would be working with kids on what they want to learn and know in addition, or where they want to go deep, where their passions are. And so what that could mean is that if you're a high school student, there may be a set of things in math that you need to learn. And if they're tough for you, then there may be a week where you're saying, you know what, this is tough. So I'm going to get to school at 7 a.m. this week because I need some extra time. And my class is not necessarily, I sit with 30 people and I learn something and it's Tuesday, so we're doing this topic, but it's me saying, how do I learn? What do I know? What do I need? This is something I need a lot of time on. But man, if I'm rocking it in science, like I might be able to do that at home on my couch, no big deal. I can get through this really quickly because that for me is coming easily. So I think the learning being the constant, but the time and the approach being variable is really important. I think it also speaks to ways in which we can disentangle the systems in school that are really meant for compliance and keeping order, but are actually not serving our students. And so, you know, if you're late to school now, you might get a detention or you might get a call home, or that there might be some kind of consequence for you, or you're not wearing your uniform. But if we're allowing kids in a student-centered way to actually drive their educational experience, like maybe there is no on time for school. Maybe you're working with an adult who's helping facilitate your learning to make your schedule for the week. And of course, our kids need support to be able to meet those expectations. But it may not be that you need to take gym class at 8 a.m. because what you love to do is play football and you're on the football team and that's your gym class, or you're going to hit the weights on Saturday and Sunday and that's your thing. And so I think we just have to start disentangling these really compliance-driven systems and meet our kids where they are and help them build their own pathway towards the things that they most want to pursue in their own lives.
Thank you, Maura. Thanks to everyone on our panel. We really appreciate, one, the large vision that you have laid out for us. Many of our students in this program, where our program is called Educational Transformation. So their goal, their desire is to transform education to reach those students that are furthest away from opportunity. Thank you also for sharing with us the work you're already doing under your sphere of influence to help serve the families and students and educators of DC. Thank you for the challenge you've laid out for us that we can actually go into and work in our own spheres of influence to move in education toward equity and really addressing some of the inequities that our students and our families face each day. I also want to thank all of our participants and the audience for being with us on this Friday evening, for the wonderful questions that you shared with us. Thank you all again, and thanks for the Program in Educational Transformation and the Program in Education Inquiry and Justice for sponsoring tonight. Professor Sinclair, are there any other closing comments?
No, just thank you for what was a very inspirational. I think I'm leaving on a moment of hope, which is hard to come by these days. And so I really appreciate your insights and your vision for what can come next. Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone.